was the last week of school, and even though summer break was right around the corner, there was a strange tension hanging in the air. I was in middle school at the time, and usually this time of year meant coasting through the last few days with barely any work. Teachers were more relaxed, and kids were just waiting for the final bell to ring. It was the end of the day, and I was in my last class, history. Our teacher had put on a documentary, probably to kill time, and most of the students were either whispering or dozing off. I remember feeling a sudden urge to go to the bathroom, so I asked for a pass and stepped out into the hallway. The second I stepped outside the classroom, I noticed how eerily quiet it was. Normally, even if the halls were empty, you could hear murmurs from classrooms, the distant echo of a teacher lecturing. But now, complete silence. I felt a chill run down my spine, but I shook it off, convincing myself I was just overthinking it. The closest bathrooms were down the hall, past the library. As I walked, I heard the sound of footsteps ahead, just around the corner. I hesitated for a second, but kept walking, rounding the corner just in time to see a figure disappearing into the library. I didn't get a good look, but something about the way they moved unsettled me. No one was supposed to be in the library this late in the day, especially not when all the books had already been packed up for the summer. Curious, but cautious, I kept going. I finally reached the bathroom and pushed the door open. Only one of the fluorescent lights was working, flickering faintly. As I stepped inside, I caught movement in the mirror, just a shadow, shifting slightly in the last stall. My breath hitched. Someone was in there. I tried to convince myself it was just another student, but my gut told me otherwise. I took a step back, deciding to leave. The second my foot scraped against the tile, the stall door creaked, slowly. It didn't open all the way, just enough for me to see a sliver of darkness between the door and the frame. Then I heard something. It sounded like someone whispering, "Help me." My body froze. The voice was strained, weak. Whoever was inside wasn't moving. Something about it felt wrong. Every instinct in me screamed to run, but my legs wouldn't move. I swallowed hard and managed to say, "Are you okay?" But nothing, just silence. Then the stall door creaked open just a little more. Then, suddenly the lights went out completely. The flickering bulb died, plunging the entire bathroom into darkness. I didn't wait. I turned and bolted, nearly slamming into the door on my way out. The second I was back in the hallway, I stopped, chest heaving. The hallway was still empty, still too quiet. I glanced back at the bathroom door, expecting to see someone step out, but no one did. Just as I was about to run back to class, a sound echoed from inside, a dragging sound like something heavy being pulled across the floor. I ran. I didn't stop until I was back in the classroom, slamming the door behind me. My teacher and classmates looked at me, startled. I wanted to tell them. I wanted to explain what had just happened. But when I turned to look at the hallway through the door's window, it was completely empty. Nothing. No shadow. No sound. Just the empty, quiet hallway. I never used that bathroom again. In fact, I avoided even walking near the library for the rest of the year. I asked some teachers about it a few days later, but they all gave me the same confused look. There's no bathroom near the library, but I know what I saw, and I know what I heard. My name is Daniel. I graduated from the University of Michigan in 2018. College was a blur of late-night study sessions, tailgate parties, and the occasional existential crisis about my future. I made great friends, got decent grades, and even landed a respectable job in finance right after graduation. Looking back, my time at Michigan was great, except for one night in my sophomore year that I still can't explain. It was mid-October, and my roommate Eric and I were in the thick of internship hunting. Everyone we knew was obsessing over their resumes and LinkedIn profiles. The pressure was getting to me, and I desperately needed a break. That's when I got an email that seemed almost too good to be true. A small but well-known investment firm had reached out, stating they'd come across my profile and wanted to interview me. What was odd was that I hadn't even applied there. I figured they must have seen my credentials through a mutual connection or career portal, so I didn't think too much of it. The email was signed by someone named Brandon LeClaire. A quick Google search turned up nothing. No LinkedIn profile, no company bio, nothing. That made me pause, but Eric waved it off. Maybe he's just old school, he suggested. I agreed and replied to set up the interview. Brandon responded almost instantly, providing a time and place. 7 p.m. the next evening at a cafe on the outskirts of Ann Arbor. That was another red flag. Why not an office? Why not even a known coffee shop? Still, my curiosity got the better of me. The next evening, I took an Uber to the address. As soon as I arrived, the cafe was just an empty lot. The whole street was eerily silent. A few old brick buildings stood nearby, but they looked abandoned. I checked my phone. No messages from Brandon. Just as I was about to call Eric to come pick me up, a voice called my name. I turned to see a tall, clean-cut man in an expensive gray suit standing beside a black SUV. He smiled and approached me, extending a hand. "Daniel, good to meet you," he said smoothly. "Sorry about the location mix-up. The cafe closed last week, but we can still talk. Hop in and we'll go somewhere better." My mind told me not to get into that car. His explanation seemed too convenient, and something about his tone was strange. I forced a polite smile. "Actually, I think I'll pass. Maybe we can reschedule for a more formal setting." His expression changed slightly, but he quickly covered it with another easy smile. "Come on, no need to be so stiff. Just a short drive." He gestured to the car again. That's when I saw through the SUV's tinted window, just barely visible in the dim streetlight, was a shadowy figure slumped in the back seat. Something about the stillness of the shape inside was deeply wrong, as I noticed the slight gleam of something metallic in the figure's hand, something long and sharp. Without another word, I spun on my heel and sprinted back down the street. Behind me, I heard the car door slam and footsteps pounding after me. As I turned a corner, searching frantically for cover, that's when I saw it, a narrow alleyway with a rusty fire escape just within reach. I leapt, grabbing the ladder and hauling myself up with every ounce of strength I had. Below, I heard Brandon curse loudly. The SUV's engine roared to life. I scrambled onto the metal platform and pressed myself against the cold brick wall, barely daring to breathe. Seconds later, the SUV screeched onto the street below. The passenger side door opened and another man stepped out. Unlike Brandon, this one was dressed casually, but he moved with a terrifying precision. He looked up, scanning the fire escape. I was terrified he saw me. He didn't shout or call for me to come down. He just stared, head tilted slightly, as if debating something. Then, after what felt like an eternity, he nodded once, got back in the car, and the SUV sped off into the night. I stayed on that fire escape for a solid 10 minutes before finally calling Eric, voice shaking as I explained what happened. He was there in record time. He helped me down and drove me back to our dorm. I never heard from Brandon again. No follow-up email, no explanation. When I tried looking up the investment firm, I found out that they'd closed down years ago. I transferred to a new college last semester, and since I applied late, I was stuck with whatever dorm they had left. It wasn't ideal, but I didn't care much as long as I had a place to sleep. My assigned roommate, Alex, didn't respond to my messages before move-in day, so I figured I'd just meet him in person. When I arrived, his side of the room was already set up. Posters of random symbols I didn't recognize covered his walls, along with drawings of faces, distorted ones. I greeted him as he sat at his desk, hunched over something I couldn't see. He turned slowly, as if surprised I was there. He was lanky, pale, and had a permanent blank expression. His dark eyes seemed to bore into me before he nodded and turned back around. No words, no introduction, just that eerie stare. I tried to get settled, but the room felt creepy. It smelled stale, like damp paper and something metallic. That night, as I lay in bed, I heard whispering, like it was drifting through the vents, but it got louder. I realized it was coming from Alex's side of the room. I peeked over. He sat cross-legged on his bed, back facing me, muttering something over and over. I couldn't understand it, but it had a almost chant-like quality. I shifted in my bed, and the whispering stopped abruptly. Alex turned his head slightly as if listening for my movement, then lay down without a word. Things got weirder over the next few weeks. He never left the room, never went to class. I'd leave in the morning, come back in the evening, and he'd be in the same position, scribbling into a notebook or staring at his wall of distorted faces. I once asked what he was always drawing. He looked at me for an uncomfortably long time before saying, "People I've met." I checked out his desk when he went to the bathroom one night. His notebook was filled with frantic sketches of faces, but when I flipped further, he had drawn me. Over and over, my face was in different expressions: fear, anger, sadness. Some had my eyes scratched out. others had my mouth sewn shut. I shoved the notebook back and lay in bed, forcing myself to breathe evenly as he returned. I didn't sleep that night. I barely slept the nights after that, waking up to the sound of his whispering, or worse, his quiet giggling in the dark. I kept trying to tell myself I was overthinking it, that he was just weird, not dangerous. But then I don't know why, but I want to look inside his box. It was under his bed, peeking out just slightly one evening when he had gone to shower. I pulled it out. Inside were small items, things I had lost, my old keychain, a broken pen, a strand of my hair twisted around a toothpick. But the worst part, a small Polaroid of me sleeping. I felt scared. I never took a picture like this. He must have. While I was asleep, I shoved the box back just as he walked in. He froze in the doorway, eyes locking onto mine. He wasn't holding anything, just standing there watching. The room felt suffocating. After what felt like hours, he finally smiled, small, forced, unnatural. Found what you were looking for. I didn't answer. I didn't move. He walked to his bed. I packed my things that night and begged the RA to move me. They didn't have space, so I started sleeping in the study hall. A few days later, I returned to grab my things and found Alex's side of the room completely empty, as if he was never there. No one knew where he went, no withdrawal records, no sign he ever attended classes, just gone. But the real horror. I found his notebook under my bed when I moved out. Flipping to the last page, there was only one sentence, written in shaky, uneven handwriting. Not this time. My name is Iris, and I'm 24 years old. Back in middle school, I was in the choir. I wasn't the best singer, but my mom always encouraged me to stick with it. I think she liked the idea of me being in something structured, something safe. Our choir teacher, Mr. Bennett, was well liked by the school. He was in his late 40s, always wearing the same navy blazer, and had this habit of tapping his fingers against his leg whenever he spoke. He wasn't exactly friendly, but he wasn't strict either. I struggled with my harmonies, so Mr. Bennett started offering to tutor me after school. At first, these lessons were in the choir room, just the two of us, sitting at the piano while he played my part over and over again. I didn't like the way the school halls felt when they were empty, but I figured I was just being paranoid. Then, after a few weeks, he started suggesting I come to his house for lessons. I wasn't comfortable with the idea. I mean, why would I need to go to his house? The choir room had everything we needed. But he kept pushing, casually bringing it up at the end of every lesson. You'll improve faster without distractions, he'd say. My home piano is much better than this one. I always said no. One afternoon, I stayed late for a group rehearsal for an upcoming winter concert. Most of the other students had left early, so when practice ended, I was the last one waiting for my ride. My mom was running late. I sat on the cold stone steps outside the school, watching as the streetlights flickered on, one by one. Mr. Bennett stepped outside. Still waiting, he asked. I nodded, avoiding eye contact. You know, my house is just a few minutes away, he said, that nervous finger tapping starting up again. You can wait there. I'll even give your mom a call for you. Something about the way he said it gave me creeps. I told him no. He smiled, nodded, but didn't leave. He just stood there, shifting on his feet. All right, well, I'll be in my car if you change your mind. I watched as he walked toward the parking lot. He wasn't heading to the teacher's lot, though. He was going to the back of the school where hardly anyone parked. Something wasn't right. I pulled out my phone and tried calling my mom, but my phone battery is dead. A few minutes passed. It was so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat. Then I heard something else. Purposeful sound of someone walking normally. These were coming from behind the building. I turned my head just in time to see a shadow slipping around the corner. I shot up from the steps. I called out, "Mom," hoping she had finally arrived, but no answer. I backed up against the front doors. They were locked. My mind was racing. Was I overreacting? Was it just another teacher? Then I saw Mr. Bennett was standing at the edge of the building, just barely visible in the dim light. His blazer was gone. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, and his hands were curled into fists. "Let's go," he said. His voice was flat, like he was stating a fact, not making a request. Every instinct in me screamed run. I bolted down the steps, heading straight for the sidewalk. I didn't stop to see if he was following me. I just ran. I turned the corner, expecting to see my mom's car, but nothing. A car door slammed behind me. I spun around. Mr. Bennett was getting into his car, an old black sedan. He pulled out onto the street, moving slow, matching my pace. I tried to act like I didn't notice, like I wasn't absolutely terrified. Then, finally, I see my mom's car headlights. I sprinted into the street, waving my arms frantically. She hit the brakes, her face contorted in confusion. I yanked open the door and dove inside, locking it immediately. "Go," I said. She didn't ask questions, she just drove. I turned in my seat, watching as Mr. Bennett's car slowed to a stop at the intersection. He didn't follow us. I never went to another after-school rehearsal again. And a week later, we were informed that Mr. Bennett had resigned from his position. No one ever said why, but I think I know. It was during my junior year of college when I had the most terrifying experience of my life. I went to a mid-sized university where you could walk from one end of campus to the other in about 25 minutes. I lived in an older dorm building on the far edge of campus, a little separated from the main academic buildings. It wasn't uncommon for me to stay late in the library, especially during exam season. But that night, I had stayed far later than usual. I lost track of time while reviewing for an important test, and by the time I looked at the clock, it was already past 1 a.m. The library was mostly empty by then, except for a couple of students scattered in different corners. I packed up my things and headed out into the cold night. The campus was eerily silent. The streetlights flickered faintly, barely illuminating the deserted walkways. As I made my way down the main path, I couldn't shake this unsettling feeling, like something wasn't quite right. I chalked it up to exhaustion and picked up my pace. About halfway back to my dorm, I noticed something strange. A man stood motionless beneath one of the dim streetlights, near an old classroom building. He wasn't a student. His posture was too rigid, his clothes too out of place. He wore a long coat and his face was partially obscured by shadows. I tried not to stare, but as I walked past, I could feel his gaze locked onto me. I kept walking, resisting the urge to look back, but a minute later I heard it, the unmistakable sound of footsteps. At first, they were distant, almost cautious, but as I continued, they quickened. My heart pounding as I stole a glance over my shoulder and saw him. He was following me, his long coat shifting with each step. I turned onto a narrower path that cut through a small courtyard. The shortcut would get me to my dorm faster. I picked up my pace, but so did he. The closer I got to my building, the heavier my legs felt, my body wanting to run, but my mind unsure if I should. As I approached my dorm's entrance, I reached into my pocket for my keycard. My fingers fumbled over it as I swiped, the door unlocking with a soft beep. I slipped inside and made sure the door clicked shut behind me. The lobby was empty. I exhaled, thinking I was safe. But then, a sickening realization dawned on me. There was another entrance on the side of the building, one that didn't require a keycard if someone caught the door before it fully closed. And worse, I had just seen one of my dorm mates leaving through it moments before I entered. I bolted for the stairs, my room on the 3rd floor. Just as I reached the 2nd, I heard the heavy creak of the lobby door opening. Then, slow, deliberate footsteps entering the hallway. I reached my floor and sprinted down the corridor. I fumbled with my keys, my hands shaking. As I shoved the key into the lock, I stole one last glance down the hallway. My stomach dropped. The man was standing at the bottom of the staircase, staring directly at me. I slammed the door shut and locked it. My breath came in ragged gasps as I pressed my ear to the door. Nothing, just silence. Then, after what felt like an hour, the sound of slow, heavy footsteps moving away. I called campus security immediately. When they arrived, they searched the building and found him in the basement. He wasn't a student. He had no reason to be there. And the scariest part. When they reviewed the security footage, they found he had been standing outside the library before I even left. When I was in middle school, I wasn't the most social kid. I mostly kept to myself, reading or doodling in my notebook. My parents were strict, and they never let me stay after school unless it was for something important. But one evening, I had to stay late for a project with a few classmates in the school library. It was a Thursday, and we were supposed to be out by 5:30 p.m. My mom had promised to pick me up right after work, but by the time we packed up, my group had already left and I was the last student in the library. The librarian, an older woman with thick glasses, told me she was closing up soon and that I should wait near the front entrance. I waited. 15 minutes passed. My mom still hadn't shown up. I checked my phone, no messages, no calls. The school halls were completely silent, and the lights in some of the classrooms were already off. The only sound was the faint hum of the vending machine near the front desk. Then I heard something else. At first I thought it was the librarian, but when I turned my head, I saw a man standing just outside the glass doors of the library. He was tall, with a baseball cap pulled low over his face. He held something in his hands, a clipboard maybe. His eyes locked on me. The librarian, who was packing up her things, noticed him too. She smiled and walked toward the door. "Oh, you must be her ride," she said, unlocking it. That's when I felt something was wrong. The man looked at me again. His smile was forced, almost rehearsed. "Yeah, her mom sent me," he said smoothly. "She's stuck in traffic, asked me to pick her up instead." It felt strange. My mom never sent other people to pick me up. Never. The librarian turned to me. "Go on, dear, it's late." I didn't move. The man's smile widened. "Come on, kiddo. Don't want to keep your mom waiting, right?" My throat was dry. I glanced at the librarian, but she had already gathered her things and was flipping off the light switches. She wasn't paying attention anymore. That's when he reached for my arm. I yanked myself back and shook my head. My mom didn't tell me anyone was coming. The librarian sighed, clearly annoyed. "Oh, don't be difficult. This gentleman is just helping out." She turned back to the man. "I can sign her out for you if you need." I was panicking now. The man nodded quickly, then looked at me. His voice lowered just a little. "Let's go." I was about to scream when my phone rang. It was my mom. I snatched it out of my pocket and answered instantly. "Mom, where are you?" She sounded confused. "I'm in the parking lot. Where are you?" I froze. I slowly turned to look at the man. His face twitched for just a second. Then, before anyone could say anything, he turned and walked briskly out of the building, disappearing into the dark parking lot. The librarian frowned. That was strange. I didn't say anything. I just ran to the front doors and bolted outside. My mom was sitting in the car, completely unaware of what had just happened. When I told her everything, she was horrified. There were some kids messing around in that area. She stormed back into the school to tell the librarian, but by then, the man was long gone. The school checked their visitor records the next day. No one had signed in under that name. No one matching his description had any reason to be there. I still don't know who he was.